were positive.
And we've also heard from the president's physician overnight. He says Mr. Trump and the First Lady are both resting, but well, in his words, and he expects the president to continue carrying out his duties without disruption while recovering.
We have a lot to walk you through, everything we know, the concerns for the president's health and the impact on the country, on the economy, and also on the campaign.
Let's get started with the White House. NBC's Peter Alexander is there. Peter, good morning to you.
Savannah and Hoda, good morning to both of you. This is a jarring headline. The President of the United States, Donald Trump, the most powerful man in the world, and the First Lady both testing positive for the coronavirus. This morning, it is still unclear exactly how and when they were exposed to it. The President and First Lady now isolating here at the White House and the residence behind me with all public events canceled. In an extraordinary and stunning announcement overnight, President Trump delivering his own diagnosis on Twitter. Tonight, the First Lady and I tested positive for COVID-19. We will begin our quarantine and recovery process immediately. We will get through this together. Melania Trump with a tweet of her own. We are feeling good and I have postponed all upcoming engagements. The president's physician reporting President Trump is well, but did not indicate whether the president was experiencing symptoms, saying the president and Mrs. Trump plan to remain home within the White House during their convalescence, adding, "Rest assured, I expect the president to continue carrying out his duties without disruption while recovering." Still, the announcement throwing the future of the country's leadership into uncertainty. Late Thursday, the president speaking by phone to Fox News, confirming that one of his closest advisors, Hope Hicks, had become infected by the virus.
She tested positive. She's a hard worker, a lot of masks. She wears masks a lot, but she tested positive.
And revealing that he and the First Lady were awaiting their own coronavirus test results.
I just went out with a test. I'll see what, because we spent a lot of time, and the First Lady just went out with a test also. So whether we quarantine or whether we have it, I don't know.
Hicks is regularly in close contact with the president, seen here without a mask at his Pennsylvania rally last Saturday. Flying on Air Force One to Tuesday's debate in Cleveland, again no mask. And on Wednesday, traveling with the president to a rally in Minnesota. A source telling NBC News Hicks tested negative the morning of the Minnesota trip, but began showing minor symptoms that evening. She was quarantined on Air Force One for the return flight to Washington. The president suggesting service members and law enforcement officials may have given her the virus.
It's very, very hard when you are with people from the military or for law enforcement, and they come over to you and they want to hug you and they want to kiss you because we really have done a good job for them. And you get close and things happen.
In a pre-recorded speech to the Al Smith charity dinner Thursday, President Trump contradicted his own public health experts, insisting the virus would soon be in the rearview mirror.
The end of the pandemic is in sight.
The president, who's been reluctant to embrace social distancing and masks at the debate just days earlier, saying this.
Look, I have a mask right here. I put a mask on it, when I think I need it. Tonight, as an example, everybody's had a test and you've had social distancing and all of the things that you have to, but I wear masks when needed. When needed, I wear masks.
Okay, let me ask.
I don't wear masks like him. Every time you see him, he's got a mask. He could be speaking 200 feet away from it. He shows up with the biggest mask I've ever seen.
Overnight, we heard from the Vice President, Mike Pence. The last time we know that he and President Trump were together was this past Tuesday, 48 hours before the president tested positive. The two were in the Oval Office together. The Vice President and his wife on Twitter sending their love and prayers to the President and First Lady. Savannah and Hoda?
Peter, let's talk about the testing because there is frequent testing at the White House for anybody who is around the president, and presumably that took place this week. Hope Hicks reportedly had a negative test Tuesday and Wednesday, but then positive on Thursday. How would this have shaken out?
Well, you're right. So we are told that all senior staff, those who are with the president most frequently, that they are tested every day, as well as guests who are going to be in close contact with him for an event or whatever other meetings he may be hosting. At this point, we do not know whether any other staffers besides Hope Hicks are currently infected right now. As for the president's day-to-day, the only remaining item on his schedule, according to the White House, is a phone call on COVID-19 support to vulnerable seniors. Savannah and Hoda.
All right, Peter, thank you. There's a lot to unpack there. There's a medical story, there's a politics story, there's a national security story. We've got Hallie Jackson, our chief White House correspondent here, our medical contributor, Dr. Vin Gupta, national security analyst Jeremy Bash, and our Capitol Hill correspondent who also covers the Biden campaign, Casey Hunt. Let me start with you, Dr. Gupta. So the president has tested positive, that we know. There are frequent rapid tests conducted at the White House. They are said to be less accurate. Is it your presumption this morning that the president likely also received that, what I consider the creme de la creme of tests? They call it the PCR test. It is more accurate. It takes longer to get results. Is it your assumption, doctor, that that's the test he had that revealed this diagnosis?
Good morning, Savannah. It's certainly my hope that that's the case, because if he didn't, then what we would want, I would want to know what was the test. What's been thrown around is this idea that the Abbott ID Now test is the test that all senior staff in the White House and the executive have been utilizing for these trips. That specific machine, we know, has a false negative rate of up to 50% in some cases per a recent NYU study. So the fact that Hope Hicks on Tuesday potentially tested negative and then was developing symptoms on Wednesday, that test was effectively meaningless because she could have been pre-symptomatic but positive. And we know that younger individuals, she's 31, that are infected could still be shedding the virus and are infectious to others. So that's the deep concern here. Do they just not have the right testing accoutrements, that right rapid test, to make sure that they have the confidence that the test result is actually accurate? I'm concerned specifically on that.
All right, Dr. Gupta, let's assume for all intents and purposes that he does in fact have it. He's 74 years old, and we've done a ton of stories on how when you're older and have other underlying conditions, there are more problems with that. When you look at this particular case, what's your assessment of it?
I'm worried, Hoda. The president is 74. And he also has something we call metabolic syndrome. His weight's above a level that we would actually call him overweight, obese. That combination, I've cared for several patients with that double whammy of being a higher age and then also being overweight. They tend, if they get sick, if they become symptomatic, they escalate quickly, potentially to needing or requiring ICU level care. So you can imagine his physicians will be looking at his oxygen level using something called the pulse oximeter. They'll be seeing if he's short of breath. Does he have a fever? Does he have chills or a cough? Very extreme vigilance here is warranted for the president, for the first lady, for anybody. But they're going to be looking specifically at those early signs and symptoms that might suggest that he needs hospital-level care.
Really quick, Dr. Gupta, I mean, you're a doctor, not a politician, but when I look at what his physician said, he said that the first lady and the president are well. He did not say they are symptom-free. Did you read into that in any way?
I did. Savannah, I think it's important that they overshare information. I want to know what's his symptom profile, to your point, to the First Lady, how's the First Lady feeling? And critically, what is Hope Hicks feeling like? Because if she was a high-risk exposure because she's very symptomatic at a young age, then that's concerning. That means everybody on Air Force One, everybody else potentially they came in contact with, needs to isolate for 14 days per CDC guidelines.
All right, we're going to bring in Hallie Jackson for a second, because what's happening right now, I would imagine, is sort of the A list of contact tracing. We're trying to find out who the president was in touch with. He's been on Air Force One, on Marine One. Break it down for us, Hallie.
Yes. He has traveled every single day this week, starting on Monday, right, with an event at the Rose Garden. He was appearing publicly with cabinet officials. Tuesday, of course, the debate. Wednesday, a rally. And then Thursday, a fundraiser up at Bedminster. You talk about close contact, right? What does that mean? Per CDC guidelines, when somebody tests positive, they then do contact tracing with close contacts. That is defined as somebody who has had 15 minutes or more exposure to you within 6 feet, essentially. So when you look at the timeline here, the key day that we're honing in on is Tuesday, because that is when the president was with, on Air Force One, 20 to 30 people friends, family members, top staffers. We're talking about all of his adult children, in addition to First Lady Melania Trump. We're talking about his campaign manager, Bill Stepien, top advisor, Jason Miller, people who are critical, for example, in debate prep as well. The president's been doing that for several days prior to the debate. That includes his attorney, for example, Rudy Giuliani, who is also traveling with the president, and all of the aides that you're seeing here, his kids, Jared Kushner, Ivanka Trump, who also happen to be senior advisors to him as well. So the contact tracing is happening. I've spoken with sources close to this process overnight. The expectation is that staffers are ready to get some calls, some of them to say, hey, you need to go and quarantine at this point. But this is a circle on top of a circle on top of a circle, because this is not just President Trump and the First Lady. It's the people who are directly close to them, their senior staffers, who, by the way, run government, right? And then it's the next circle out, all the other people that those people talk to. So this is absolutely a lift, and it's one of the biggest questions we have moving forward. Who on this list? You're seeing people who traveled with Hope Hicks. All of those people also, of course, travel with President Trump. Who on this list has been notified? Where does the contact tracing go from here, Hoda?
Absolutely, Hallie. I mean, we'll pick it up from there. And then you imagine if somebody had exposure, then did they go off to Capitol Hill, for example, for a meeting? I mean, it's just when you start to look at the ripple effect, it's really the implications are wide ranging. I want to bring in Jeremy Bash, who's our national security analyst. And in a second, Jeremy, I want to ask you about, how our adversaries might be looking at a situation like this, how the U.S. government plans when you have uncertainty about the president's health. But just to pick up very quickly on Hallie's point about the close proximity, you've ridden on choppers that are like Marine One. It's not, it's a small quarters. Hope Hicks was in that chopper with the president, with other top aides. Can you describe kind of that scenario? That's Marine One. That's the military helicopter that is called Marine One when the president is riding it. And there's Hope Hicks and other top officials getting on board.
Yeah, it's close quarters, Savannah. It's like being on a large elevator, but instead of being on for 10 or 15 minutes, you're on there for 2 hours. It's very hard to avoid being very close to everyone else on that chopper.
Let's talk about the national security implications right now. What preparations are being made? What are the mechanisms of government that kind of go into effect when you have a situation where the president may be seriously ill?
Well, the president can remain commander-in-chief even in isolation. He's got the communications, he's got the secure telephones to give any orders. But there are two scenarios I worry about, Savannah. First is the scenario like what happened to the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson, where he got so sick he had to go into intensive care. If the president is incapacitated, Mike Pence, the VP, would become the acting president. That's only happened 3 times in recent history, Savannah. The second scenario I worry about is, of course, our adversaries are watching, and if they sense that we are unprepared, off balance, or somehow unable to respond, they could engage in a very provocative military act. And then we could be off to the races in a very significant national security crisis.
All right, Jeremy, thank you. Well, let's bring in Casey Hunt right now. Casey, just a couple of days ago, the president and Joe Biden were just feet away at that debate. Has the Biden campaign said anything about the news overnight?
At this point, Hoda, they have not yet, and we have obviously been in touch with officials at all levels of the Biden campaign, because not only were those two men on stage together, but obviously their families and those traveling with them were sitting in the audience. And while that audience was socially distant, members of the Trump family came in without wearing masks. And there was a staffer with the Cleveland Clinic, a host of the debate, who tried to give them blue surgical masks to wear, and they were refused, turned down. So we know that there is some fear among people who were sitting in that audience. We've heard from at least one person who was invited to sit in that audience about concern they could have been exposed. There were obviously family members, also some members of Congress, Senator Chris Coons among them. But so far, we have not heard anything. The vice president scheduled to appear today in Michigan. We've reported that they have asked one reporter who was scheduled to travel with him not to, because that reporter was on Air Force One covering the president earlier in the week. Although the campaign seems to think that the risk of exposure is pretty low at this point. But obviously, the ripple effects here incredible. And we haven't even gotten to the Supreme Court, Amy Coney Barrett and others on the Hill who could be exposed as well.
Amy Coney Barrett is obviously spent some time at the White House, also spent a lot of time with Mark Meadows, the chief of staff, who was on Air Force One going to the debate. This is what we're talking about. When you start tracing out and kind of getting the family tree, you see how quickly something like this can spiral. I actually wanted to bring in the doctor briefly.
This is disheartening. It's disheartening because last week I made gestures that the president should be charged for reckless endangerment. I had also made gestures about a month ago, maybe a little more than a month ago, that I feared for his life. I feared for his safety because of him not taking matters as seriously as he should, especially whenever it comes to this coronavirus. The only thing that I can say at this point in time is for the Christian society to pray for our chief and commander and for the First Lady, and to pray for those who have been exposed to the President of the United States, that they will recover quickly and sufficiently. Because anytime something like this occurs, it does create a national security issue. All hands on board. In other words, we go from DEFCON, let's just say DEFCON 1, up to DEFCON 2 immediately, because now there's been a transformation. Now there's been a sense of a threat. And because of it, don't think for a second that this government won't take this serious. But the point that I've tried to make, and will continue to make, is that the leader of the government hasn't taken it serious. Offering masks and refusing them. You can't continue to press your luck like this and thinking that you're invincible, because none of us is invincible. He may be one of the I hope that he's some of the millions that get it, that won't have harsh repercussions over it. That's the best that I can do, is hope that he won't fall victim the way that, what is it now, 209,000 has perished here in the United States. He's on up there in years. And he's kind of like me. He's overweight. He's obese. And whenever you have those contributing factors, I don't know if he's diabetes or not. I'm diabetes too. Whenever you have those contributing factors, that automatically puts you in a higher category towards a higher risk. But then again, we've seen this coronavirus do some crazy things. We've seen it attack the young. A baseball player or a soccer player the other day, I was watching the news where this girl, she was as fit, hard as a rock from top to bottom. I think she was about 22 years old. She got it and died from it. So it's hit and miss. It's hit and miss across the board. You don't really know what the virus itself is going to do towards how a person's body responds to the virus once they have been exposed or in contact with this disease. It's horrible. It's absolutely horrible. If there's ever been a time that we needed to pray for our chief and commander and pray for those up there in the White House, it's now. This is serious. It's always been serious. It was serious since January of this year. Since the impeachment trials, it's been serious.
On this issue of the debate, Dr. Gupta, I'm sure you saw it. So here they are on stage together. Now, they are socially distanced, and it, to the naked eye, looks like more than 6 feet. Chris Wallace also there. Do you consider this to be a concern, or do you feel that there was enough space that it shouldn't be an issue?
So, man, I think this is a deep concern. What we know now with COVID-19, what we didn't know a few months ago, is that, frankly, 6 feet may not be enough, especially in an indoor environment that is not well ventilated. You can't really ventilate any indoor environment come very well, and there was air conditioning, or there's at least some degree of airflow happening. So no one is protected. Everybody has to assume that they need to quarantine, for the full 14 days, and a negative test does not exonerate them to go back onto the campaign trail. So whether it's the Biden campaign or the Trump campaign, this is a very, very serious event. 6 feet really is effectively nothing given the nature of this virus and the more we learn about it.
Can I show you one other? I don't know if you're able to see this image. If not, I'll just describe it to you. But this is some of the top officials of the campaign boarding Air Force One this week. Now, presumably at this point, Hope Hicks has it. And when you see this video, okay, this is the first shot. You see Jared Kushner, I believe that's Dan Scavino, who's the social media director at the White House. But now watch as they go up the staircase here. Here comes Hope. And as one does, you put your hand on the railing. And then I just couldn't help but notice that then as people go up, there goes Jared with his hand there, and it's obviously we know about transmission in the air, but isn't this also a potential place of transmission? By the way, the president goes up a few minutes later on that same staircase, that same railing.
Such a vitally important issue you raised here, Savannah. What we know, and this is why workplace health and safety protocols are adapting to this, we know COVID-19 can exist on metal bars, on doorknobs, on workplace benches. That's why sanitation protocols have had to change pretty dramatically. So yes, if she was not symptomatic at that point, but was pre-symptomatic, she's still infectious potentially, especially because she's young. And if she coughed onto her hand or touched her, let's say just had eaten something, it's very plausible that she could have actually passed on virus just through that hand railing. So it's very, very realistic.
Dr. Gupta, thank you. Stand by. We are going to continue our rolling coverage as well as our White House correspondents and Casey Hunt, Jeremy Bash as well. But let's take a turn now and get a check of the weather with Al.
Well, 7:19 Al, what do you got?
Well, we've got two basically weather systems going on. A persistent Canadian low in the east with unseasonably cool weather and a massive ridge in the west, which means we've got right now both these patterns stuck in place until next week. So in the east, we've got freeze warnings, frost advisory for 19 million people. Temperatures today are going to be well below where they normally should be.
This morning with temperatures back in the 30s, and you may have to turn on the heat in the 31-year-old George Dawson III. It'll be arraigned Monday afternoon in the New Madrid County Courthouse. Dawson is charged with first-degree murder and armed criminal action, and the shooting
tracing and testing effort to identify and isolate anybody who's infected. This is going to be a lot of work, and it's going to probably end up involving a lot of senior people in the U.S. government, and it's going to be complicated. But I hope that the White House and the medical team is ready to do it.
What's your expectation, Dr. Jab, what happens from this moment forward for the president himself? We can talk about all the ripple effects, but for him personally, how will he be treated? How should he be quarantined? What does that look like for him?
Yeah, so he needs to be isolated, as anybody who's infected with the virus would be. And then I don't know the details of what's happening with him, if he's asymptomatic versus is he having symptoms. We are developing some therapies for people early in the disease course, such as monoclonal antibodies. They have not been given full approval. I would really, if I were his physician, obviously I would just track how he's doing. And we're going to all hope that he doesn't develop any symptoms. But the key point here is that it can take many days to develop symptoms, and it can take many more days to get really sick. So we're going to be watching this closely, I think, for the next 5 to 10 days, maybe longer.
All right, Dr. Jha, thank you so much for being with us. David Ignatius, we talked about this briefly before, but again, we obviously, as a country, face many threats daily. I'm curious what, if the president is staying in bed, is recovering and not actively working, what does the foreign policy, what should our foreign policy apparatus do? What does that look like in situations like this?
Joe, the basic machinery runs, I want to say, on autopilot. Obviously, a lot of effort in directing it, but our military around the globe in constant communication through satellite connections, combatant commands that look at every area of crisis. Our intelligence agencies are unique in the world. There's simply nothing like the American spread of sensors, collection technology that never stops and won't now. So all of those fundamentals of our strength continue. Sometimes President Trump has seemed almost to want to disrupt them, resent them, but he has not succeeded, and they're still there. It's interesting to me that Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has been more aggressive recently in some policies that initially the president probably was a little bit skeptical about. Mike Pompeo has gotten very concerned about Turkey and Turkey's expansionist, disruptive policies in the Middle East, the war that's going on between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Pompeo has taken a more forward-leaning position, was just in Greece doing some interesting diplomacy with Greece, although it wasn't widely recognized. Yesterday, the United States, Russia, and France jointly moved in a common diplomatic effort to stop the war between Armenia and Azerbaijan. That's a very unusual thing for the U.S. to be cooperating so closely with Russia. That was something that was managed by Pompeo. It will be ongoing. So I think people shouldn't worry that suddenly, with Trump gone, our national security machinery it stops working. It's not built that way, and that won't happen. There is a question that I'd ask. This is a president who just, if a day goes by where he hasn't tweeted, intervened, done something, seems to get upset. And will his doctors, will his good sense say, you're set, you have to get over this disease. You've got to stop trying to run the world by Twitter. And so I'd keep an eye on that. If he's tweeting a lot, you'd say, boy, that's not what he needs to be doing right now. He needs to be getting well. So he's got a campaign to finish, among other things.
All right, David Ignatius, greatly appreciate you being with us. And yes, let's hope the president rests and recovers.
And you do have to ask the question, as you recite to the old saying that when the cat's away, the mice do play. Our enemies, our adversaries, thinking that just because Trump may be down for a day or two pertaining to this sickness, may want to try to take advantage of this situation in some sort of way. And like I said, that's the reason why you go to like DEFCON 1 to automatic DEFCON 2, because there are concerns pertaining to our national security that automatically will go up.
It is interesting, Willie, that if you read Bob Woodward's book, what you find often with our foreign policy apparatus, at least over the first 3.5 years of the Trump presidency, you have people who are operating and working their agencies, trying to do their best to not have their work disrupted by a tweet or by an angry call from the White House. So perhaps the foreign policy apparatus is in pretty good position right now because they have, it's ironic, but because there hasn't been a good interagency process in this administration, they have had to learn to operate the State Department and other agencies, the intelligence agencies, on their own without a lot of interference from the White House.
Yeah, it's something you hope they never have to do, but you're right, they have been doing it that way, and perhaps that will serve them well here. Zeke Emanuel, there's no good news on a morning when the President of the United States has contracted a virus that has the potential to be deadly, but he has signaled again and again, and as has this administration, that mask wearing isn't important. He said it again on stage with Joe Biden the other day. They've had packed rallies without masks. They don't observe social distancing. Is there a chance, as we look for some silver lining today, that the dead seriousness of what's happening this morning may grab the attention of a larger swath of the country and say, oh, it got President Trump, it could get any of us. Maybe we will start to wear masks. Maybe we will observe social distancing.
Yes, I think you're 100% right. I think the communication here first is that anyone can get it, including someone where everyone around him is tested daily. There is that window where you're testing negative and yet you're contagious. And you may not have symptoms. So I do think that's a very vital message. And the second vital message is wearing a mask, staying 6 feet away from people, and doing hand hygiene. Those things we know reduce the chance of getting infected, and we know those are going to be important. Hopefully the country, especially president's supporters who have mocked people who wear masks, mocked people who stay 6 feet away, will take this to heart and begin to observe those things. That would be great for the country. Maybe we'll see our number of cases drop from 45,000 down to as low as possible. So this would be, if that public health message gets communicated, that would be a silver lining to this very, very grave situation.
Yeah, this is grave. We got breaking news now from the U.S. Labor Department.
Thank you, Zeke.
Thanks, Zeke. The U.S. economy added 661,000 jobs last month. The unemployment rate dropped to 7.9% from 8.4% in August. Let's bring back in NBC News senior business correspondent and an MSNBC anchor, Stephanie Ruhle. Looking at these numbers, Steph, there's a lot more going on in the employment, part of the economy than these numbers.
Serious questions about how the work gets done, and not just the campaign work, but the actual work that happens on a daily basis in the West Wing. We don't know this morning. We're still waiting on those answers. We're not sure who can show up to work. We're not sure who has to be in quarantine. That has a massive impact as well.
Yeah, Erica, I think that's right. And when you say who has to be in quarantine, we know what the CDC guidelines are for this. We know that if everybody was going to operate by the book, it would be days before people were congregating together, maybe a couple of weeks. I just don't expect that scenario to play out in this White House, given the timing and given what has happened.
Upon whether or not the Democrats take the Senate. If the Republicans hold the Senate, then much of what you're right.
Yeah, but the theory is if the president loses, Republicans lose. Just by the way, history has it.
But you've got to wait for the total result. I'll say this: if Biden wins and the Democrats win the Senate, you've got a real problem here because you've got tax increases coming, you've got a packed court coming, you've got all kinds of changes. But if it's just Joe Biden in the White House and the Republicans keep the Senate, the damage, and I'm making a judgment here, the damage to our society will be a lot less. And don't discount the possibility that Trump wins. You can't discount that entirely. You can't.
Right. That's why Stuart Varney has one of the most successful shows in the history of business television. Great analysis. Start to use.
What's most important?
Well, I'm doing the calculation on the actual number of jobs that have been recovered from
effect. So I think there are a lot of substantive policy and
for good.
All right, Stephanie Ruhle, thank you so much. We look forward to hearing from you as you take over after we get off at 9 o'clock. And let me go to Jonathan Lemire. And Jonathan, one of the frustrating things about the job reports that we get every month, one of the frustrating things about the unemployment rate is it often doesn't get
on this entire situation. And while Wall Street, I've spoken to a number of veteran traders there who tell me they're not entirely sure what this will ultimately mean for markets or the economy, but there is a bias to sell on uncertainty like this. And while there isn't a lot of clarity in terms of what this will mean for the election, for politics and policy, there's clarity around the fragility of the current state of our U.S. economy. 8.4% unemployment. You have millions of Americans who continue to collect unemployment in this country. 837,000 Americans just last week filed new claims for unemployment benefits. We have seen for weeks and months now highly elevated numbers of American layoffs. And at this point in the recovery, we've only recovered about half of the more than 20 million jobs lost in the state of this pandemic. And George, what's very important is that an hour away from now, we will get the September jobs report. That will be the final jobs report before the election, expected to show 800,000 new jobs added back to the economy in the month of September. The good news, jobs being added back. The trouble with that is the slowing rate of job additions here in the United States when we really need to see that number growing exponentially. George?
Okay, Rebecca, thanks. This news cutting in so many different directions. We're going to continue to cover it all morning long. We'll be right back.
We're going to leave it right there with my viewers. Like I said before, we just need to pray for our chief and commander. I've been praying for the guy. I pray for the guy. I pray for him every day. I may not mention his name, but I pray every day that God will take care of our leadership here in America, because it is so sensitive in where we are right now as a nation that everything needs to be done very appropriate. And I wouldn't wish this coronavirus on my worst enemy, on my very worst enemy. It's a horrible thing to go through, especially if you don't have the right DNA makeup that'll fight it off as it's fixing to become what it is in its affairs towards how it does what it does. But let's remember to pray for our leaders, pray for our First Lady, and good luck to all of us.